Good evening, friends. Welcome to ENT Grand Rounds Part 3. This is part of Karnataka ENT Innovative Masterclass series of programs. Today we have another innovative program that is the differential diagnosis of neck masses. This is being done by Dr. Ravi Shankar M from SGPGI Lucknow. He is an assistant professor there. And this program will be moderated by Professor and Dr. Suja Sridharan from Kasturba Medical College, Mangalore. To give a brief introduction about Dr. Suja, she is an alumnus of PGI Chandigarh, and one important thing is she was my senior and teacher also. So I used to regard her as a walking encyclopedia of otorhinolaryngology, and she proved it to be a right adjective for us. And she has also been a erstwhile head of the department at head of the department at the Department of ENT Head and Neck Surgery at Kasturba Medical College, Mangalore, and also she is a director of a pediatric cochlear implant program there. Yeah, Dr. Suja, I'm handing over to you, and it's all yours now. Yeah, and a few instructions to the audience. Once the program starts, we're going to mute all the audience. Okay. However, you can ask questions on the chat box. Okay. All your questions post in the chat box, and those questions, all questions will be addressed at the end of the session. Okay. We'll have a 30 minutes question and answer session till 7 o'clock. Okay. Yeah. Thank you all. Welcome you all again. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Prahlad. I'd like to give a brief introduction about Dr. Ravi Shankar Manogaran. Yeah. He's an alumnus of Stanley Medical College, Chennai, and also PGI Chandigarh. He's currently working as assistant professor in the Department of Neurotology, in the Department of Neurosurgery, assistant professor in Neurotology in the Department of Neurosurgery in Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute, Lucknow. He, from his curriculum vitae, I can see that he has authored many book chapters and also journal publications, which is commendable. His areas of interest are lateral skull base, anterior skull base, and implantation otology. Dr. Ravi Shankar, welcome to the program. Yep. And we are all looking forward to your talk, differential diagnosis of neck masses, which is important from not only postgraduate point of view, but also for practicing ENT consultants.
Yep. YouTube पे डालेगा, time लगेगा, अभी है तो अभी देखते हैं. Dr. Ravi, you can share your screen. Yeah. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute all participants. Okay. Right. Just give me this thing a minute. When I mute all, you also will get muted. I will have to unmute you again. You and Dr. Suja again. Okay. So I'm going to unmute you now. Yeah, you have been unmuted. Okay. Yeah, you can start now.
A very good evening. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind words. And it's honor to present in front of my prestigious alumni. And a very special thank to Dr. Prahlad sir and for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And I also have to thank for this course, like a presence and present. I attended this course and I used these ideas in this presentation. I hope I will get the feedback after this presentation, And I'm going to discuss today about the differential diagnosis of neck masses, mainly the surgeon's perspective. We know that as ENT surgeons, we regularly get the neck mass cases from other departments as well as the general practice. So as an ENT surgeon, we must aware of the all possible differential diagnosis and how to manage these cases. So I'm going to overview what I'm going to discuss this discussion. So brief anatomy of the neck and general consideration of neck masses and how to examine clinically and examination point of points and what are the diagnostics that helps in differential diagnosis, to get the differential diagnosis, and that few case scenarios, the important surgical steps and tips to improve their surgical outcome, and then complications we encountered during these neck lesions. So, any pathology, if you want to know about the pathologic different possible diagnosis, one must aware of the possible development of the particular site and also the possible normal, all the normal structures that present in the particular site. In that case, we are going to discuss about the neck. We all know that the neck is primarily developed from the pharyngeal arches. Why it is important? So one of the most common congenital anomalies is the branchial anomalies. So that's why the development is knowledge of development is very important. The second pharyngeal cleft anomaly is the most common anomaly. So I'm going to now discuss only these second pharyngeal cleft. We all know that the second pharyngeal cleft that develops and covers over the third and fourth pharyngeal cleft. Because of this, there is a high chance of entrapment of this ectoderm that leads to the development of branchial cleft, second branchial cleft anomalies, either the sinus form or in the cyst form. Then next is the normal structures that from which the different pathological conditions arises. The most important things are the salivary glands, the thyroid, and then cartilages, either hyoid, laryngeal cartilages, major vessels that include the carotid and IJV, and the deep cervical and superficial cervical lymph nodes, and the nerves that includes lower cranial nerves 9, 10, 11, 12, and sensory cervical nerves, and then brachial plexus. These are the important structures from which we can expect the possible pathologies of the neck. Okay, so come to the surgeon's point of view. So before negotiating the neck, one must aware of the normal coverings of the neck that helps the surgeon to negotiate these structures. We all know that there are two types of cervical fascia layers. That is important. One is the superficial cervical fascia, and then 3 layers of the cervical fascia. So superficial cervical fascia helps in the elevation of sublatissimal layer, sublatissimal flap elevation, and deep cervical fascia. For example, the investing layer that covers the superficial sternocleidomastoids, and then the visceral layer, and then prevertebral fascia. The importance of prevertebral fascia is that safeguards the important structures that include sympathetic chain, phrenic nerve, and the brachial plexus. So when you negotiate the neck, always try to preserve the prevertebral fascia. And then importance of investing layer. That investing layer covers the what you call all the lymph node groups. So if you have a thorough knowledge of this investing deep cervical fascia covering in the neck, we can easily negotiate the surgical tunnels that will give the clear demarcation of structures, and we can easily negotiate the neck structures and remove the pathology with minimal morbidity. So thorough knowledge of facial layers is very, very important. So come to the neck pathologies. What are before any lesions? There are certain general consideration we always keep in mind. So the age of the patient, consistency of the lesions, and the duration of the lesions. It gives some clue what type of pathology we are dealing. For example, if you are dealing with a young individual and the lesion consists of a soft or fluctuant, and the duration of the lesion was more than years or more than months, then we are probably dealing with a benign pathology. At the same time, if you are dealing with the elderly people, hard lesion with a shorter duration, then we are dealing with a malignant lesion. Again, it's 80% of the time it's a general rule, but sometimes malignancy can present in the younger age group and benign lesion can present in the older individuals. So we always keep in mind this is a general considerations. So there are certain red flag signs that gives a possible diagnosis in the neck pathologies. For example, fever, weight loss. It is important clue for the certain systemic condition like tuberculosis. And then if you are suspecting a neck malignancy, then there are certain signs that gives us possible site of primary pathology. Example, ear pain. You can suspect a pathology in the oropharynx or larynx, dysphagia, and breathing difficulty in airway, upper airway digestive tract, hemoptysis, again the airway pathologies. So again, in the neck pathologies, the past history plays very, very important because the immune status also plays in the certain pathological condition in the neck. And then family history, there are certain conditions that runs in the family kind of family conditions. And then history of radiation in the childhood, especially thyroid pathologies, and then history of surgery in the past, because there are certain lesions that are more prone for the recurrence. So these are the important past history, always keep in mind and always ask in the head and neck lesion cases. And come to the clinical examination. This is very, very important to get an idea about the possible differential diagnosis. The first and most important thing is the location, whether it's midline located or lateral, because it is important clue for the certain pathological conditions. And the mobility of the lesions. For example, the carotid body tumors, they are craniocaudally restricted mobility, but they are horizontally, they are mobile. You all know that it's a sign called Fontenay's sign. It's a classically present in a carotid body tumor. Again, consistency we discussed. The firm hard consistency favor of malignancy, and soft and fluctuant lesions are more towards the benign conditions. And most important thing is the presence of pulsations and the bruit. So if in case of bruit, you always avoid the FNAC or incision biopsy, because it may be the we are dealing with the carotid body tumors or any other paragangliomas. So these are the important clinical points you always note when you're examining the neck lesions. Other than that, so most of the time we can encounter the neck metastasis. So neck metastasis usually we secondary to that some other the primary pathology that is lies in the aerodigestive tract. So we always look for the possible primary sites that includes nasopharynx through the nasal endoscopy, base of tongue through the video laryngoscopy, oral cavity complete examination, and then laryngeal examination through the fiber optic laryngoscope. So after the thorough clinical examination, how to get the probable diagnosis? So you have to need certain investigations. What are the most common investigation will you use? Usually the ultrasound, computer tomography, MRI, and the PET scans. So most of the time single investigation more than enough, but sometimes we need a combination of these investigation. Then how can you choose the particular investigation is used for this case? That depends on what type of tumor you are dealing, and what is the location of the tumor, and what is the relation of the vital structures that relate to the tumor. And if you are suspecting metastasis, then you can go for a PET scan. So it's individualized. You have to individualize the investigation modality for the particular patient that suits for you. Then most other important investigation is that gives the conclusion of the diagnosis, possible diagnosis, is the cytological analysis. The most common investigation is the fine needle aspiration cytology. 80% of the time, it gives the confirmed diagnosis. Very rarely, we may need an incisional biopsy and or excisional biopsy, especially when if you are dealing with the granulomatous conditions like tuberculosis or in malignancy like lymphoma, we might need an incisional biopsy. So from this clinical examination and your diagnostics, what are the possible pathologies we are dealing? These pathologies either may be a congenital, or it may be infectious, or it may be a neoplasm. So what are the congenital possibilities we are dealing? It may be a vascular possibility or non-vascular. Vascular, it may be a high flow or it low flow. High flow, what usually we'll get is the AVM malformations. And low flow, what we will get is the venous malformation or lymphatic malformations. In non-vascular category, we usually will get the most common lesion is the thyroglossal cyst, followed by the second branchial arch anomalies. And then infectious, we all know that lymphadenitis is the most common condition we encounter in the pediatric age group, and then silent and then granulomatous condition kind of sarcoidosis or tuberculosis. In the neoplasm, this is the most important differential diagnosis group, and it goes in lymph nodes, it may be a lymphoma, or it may be a secondary neck metastasis. In salivary gland, it may be a most common salivary gland pathologies occur in the parotid, followed by the submandibular gland. In parotid, 80% of the lesion is a benign, and in submandibular gland, it's a 50-50%. 50% possibility of malignancy and 50% possibility of benign pathology we are dealing. And thyroid, of course, I'm not going to discuss. And thyroid, they usually present as midline lesions. And then neurovascular structures, most common thing is the schwannomas, and then the second vascular lesion is the paragangliomas. And then very rarely you'll get the lipoma also. So based on these discussions, what are the differential diagnoses we are going to get? In benign category, what are the central neck benign lesions? The most common thing is the thyroglossal duct cyst and thymic lesions or thyroid, especially the isthmus lesions. And then very rarely you'll get the dermoid and the lipoma in the central part of the neck. And then lateral benign lesions are most common thing is the lymphadenitis, followed by the branchial cleft anomalies, then salivary gland tumors, and then neural tumors like in schwannomas or neurofibromas, and then paragangliomas. In malignant categories, what are the central neck malignant lesions? Most common thing is the thyroid malignancy, followed by the lymphoma. Very rarely metastatic carcinoma can present as the midline lesions. And then lateral part, we all know that most important thing is the metastatic neck secondaries, and then salivary gland neoplasms, and then lymphomas. Very rarely we get a sarcoma, especially in a pediatric age group. Okay, so I'm going to discuss a few case scenarios and its importance of surgical aspects. We all know that a neck pathology can present from the birth, a newborn to the elderly people, and the neck lesions either may be a midline or maybe a bilateral lesion or it may be unilateral lesion. So it can be different manners. So we always keep in all the possibilities what we discuss now, and before negotiating these cases. So first thing is the branchial cleft anomalies. We all know that I just now discussed the second branchial cleft anomalies are the most common. It can present as a discharging sinus in front of the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. And remember, we already told that we always keep in the mind that this sinus can communicate with the tonsillar fossa. So whenever you deal with the excision of these second branchial cleft anomalies, always try to trace the track towards the tonsillar bed. So it's very important. If you miss that tonsillar bed portion, then the child presented with a recurrent neck infection again. So this is the case. We had a bilateral discharging sinus in front of the anterior part of the sternocleidomastoid, and recurrent painful swelling over the right side. And you can see the bilateral swelling, and then CT clearly shown that as lesion, well-defined cystic lesion that lies in front of the carotid sheath, and in front of the part of the lesion lies in front of the sternocleidomastoid. So we made the diagnosis of possible bilateral branchial cyst. And when you surgically remove these lesions, remember, always involve the cup of skin around the sinus tract. And before going into the skin flap elevation, always maintain a vascular plane. If you miss this plane, in high probability the chance of missing the track, because the track is always looks like a fibrous band. So if it's a bloody field, you can easily miss out this track, and you missed out the part of the tract also. That leads to the failure of the surgery. So in this case, we find the track and we trace the track towards the lesion, and then we trace the we dissected the lesion all around the cyst, and you further dissected the superiorly, and we find the tract was going more superiorly. And remember, the second branchial cleft anomalies always goes lateral to the ICA, or sometimes it can go in between the ICA and ECA, and that it always related to the hypoglossal nerve. Hypoglossal nerve most of the time runs lateral to the tract. So you always, when you negotiate this tract, remember these structures, because unwanted pressure over the hypoglossal nerve leads to the 12th nerve palsy. Unwanted traction over the vessels lead to the unwanted complications. So remember that. So you can see this in this image, clearly see that the track is going lateral to the ICA. This is a common carotid. This is a ICA running, and it's towards the dissected towards the base of the tonsillar fossa. And then I ligated it and then removed that. So remember, so the relation of ICA to the tract. And the next common pathology is the thyroglossal cyst. We all know that thyroid is derived from the foramen cecum. So when you deal with the thyroglossal duct pathologies, remember the possibility of lingual thyroid, and then absence of the normal thyroid gland. So it's always remember these two important points. So this is the classical presentation of thyroglossal cyst, midline swelling that moves with the protrusion of the tongue. So again, it's very easy surgery, and before touching this patient, you must do the ultrasound and ensure that the patient has a normal thyroid. And then once you elevate the skin flap, and then you always look for the tract. Sometimes the tract can be traced towards the isthmus of the thyroid. So we always dissect the strap muscles and look for the isthmus and look for the normal pathologies. So normal, any aberrant tract. Then once you dissect the thyroid cyst, then you move towards the base of the hyoid, body of the hyoid, and find the lesser carnu and cut the body, both the side at the level of lesser carnu. You cut the body, separate the body of hyoid. This is very, very important. You know that this procedure called cistern procedure. So we dissected the thyroid along with the body of the hyoid. And another most important point is you always involve the cup of tissue that attached to the superior border of the body of the hyoid. That is a part of the genohyoid that runs towards the best foramen cecum, because the tracks sometimes very difficult to identify. So just involve the cup of tissue that going towards the base of foramen cecum. So and tie this soft tissue and remove this. If you miss this step and just remove the lesion alone, then it high chance of we get the recurrence of these lesions. So these are two important things you have to remember when you deal with the thyroglossal duct cyst. Another common pathology, benign pathology we encounter in the adult individuals is the ranula. Ranula is nothing but it's a simple mucocele usually arising from the duct obstruction of sublingual glands. This is a classical case of plunging ranula in a young adult, present as a midline neck swelling. And when you deal with these lesions, remember that these cyst walls are very, very thin. So if you dissect the cyst directly, then you might possibly have injured the tissue and you might miss out the some tissue parts, some cyst part, and that leads to failure of the surgical procedure. So my advice is, when you go, when you deal with the lesions, always go around the cyst and dissect the soft tissue. For example, here, this is a plunging ranula and it's piercing through the mylohyoid. So never dissect on the cyst wall. You dissect these muscle fibers, and these muscle fibers get away from the cyst wall, and you can easily negotiate the cyst wall, and you can reach the floor of the mouth. And another most important thing is, when you deal with this plunging ranula, you need to always keep an eye on the hypoglossal nerve as well as the lingual nerve. So we are dealing with the benign pathology. You never compromise these nerves. So in this case, we remove the cyst in toto, and we can see the course of the hypoglossal and the lingual nerve in the vision. And this is a dissected mylohyoid. And one more important thing, whenever deal with the plunging ranula, after the end of the surgery, always never forget to visit the floor of the mouth, because we are we might not know that we enter the floor of mouth during the neck dissection. So this is the most important thing. You always visit the check the floor of the mouth, check for the rent in the mucosa, and repair it. If you forget this step, then everything goes wrong. It may go for infect the surgical cavity and abscess formation. So it's very important. Look at the floor of the mouth and repair the mucosal drain. Next another common pathology is the lymphangioma. Again, lymphangioma, most of the time, no need of any intervention. Sometimes we can treat with the sclerotherapy. Very rarely they need a surgery, especially when we are dealing with the big lesions that compromising or progressively increasing lesions. We need to surgically intervene in these cases. And most common site of the lesion is the posterior triangle. This is a classical case of lymphangioma. You can see that lymphangioma involving the posterior triangle and pushing the sternocleidomastoid anteriorly. Again, when you deal with this lymphangioma, remember these lymphangioma can engulf the major vessels, cranial nerves, and then based on the anatomical size, it can engulf any structure. So, and easily it can negotiate. So the only thing is aware of that engulfment and gradually dissect the cyst from the lesions. For example, here you can see that this IJV is totally engulfed by the lesion, and you can see that this is the vagus nerve and the carotid sheath, carotid bifurcation, and the 11th nerve. And we carefully dissected out all the lesions, and at the end of this, the dissection, you can see that this is the digastric, this is the spinal accessory nerve, where this is the IJV, and this is the preserved carotid sheath. So only thing is what site we are dealing and what are the structures we can anticipate, and carefully dissect the anticipated structures to prevent the unwanted complications. And this is an interesting case. This is a case of a suspected, prenatally suspected a case of teratoma. And we anticipated the breathing problem, so we delivered this child with the exit procedures. Luckily, we are intubated, so we didn't need we not done the tracheostomy. And on second day, we did the CT scan. That CT shows that there is a calcified and cystic lesion that is filling the skull base to the thoracic inlet. And we had a possibility of teratoma and then lymphangioma. And on the fifth day of life, postnatally, we planned for the surgery. I operated with the help of a plastic surgery, pediatric surgery team, and it's a very big lesions. When you deal with this small child, what is the problem you'll encounter? One is the hypothermia and insensible blood loss. These are very dangerous problem when you deal with this kind of stuff. So when you deal with these kind of cases and this kind of small children, we always team up with expertise. Never do alone. Okay, so and you carefully dissected. I dissected with only bipolar because I scared of blood loss. So we used full dissection with the bipolar, and it took 3 to 4 hours. But slowly we dissected out and carefully dissected the carotid artery and the vagus nerve, and we preserved the vagus. But the child had a vocal cord palsy postoperatively, but we managed successfully extubated, and he had some skin necrosis problem that my pediatric colleagues managed successfully. And next, very rare lesion is the EJV ectasia. Again, these lesions usually no need of any intervention if suppose we encounter in the adult patients. But This is a case of 7-year-old child presented with a huge vascular lesion in the lower part of the neck. So we can't leave because that it's psychologically they disturb the parents as well as children, and they are prone to injury that leads to the unwanted complications. So we proceed with the surgery. But before touching these cases, we must do the MRI and see the source of the feeding vessels. Sometimes maybe lesion will be superficial, but the source will be the deeper vessels like subclavian or IJV. So it's always important to the MRI of these vascular lesions and confirm the site of origin. In this case, we came to the conclusion that it's arising from the external jugular vein. It's very simple procedure, just simple excision, and the lesion was lateral to the sternocleidomastoid, and you see that just see the feeder vessels. So this is the medial feeder that is medial to the sternocleidomastoid, and then in the another one is the external over the strap muscles. It's very simple lesions. But remember, when you go for this surgery, before surgery, do the MRI and confirm the possible site of origin. Another most important vascular malformation is the AV malformation. These are high flow lesions. Again, the management is controversy. We usually we won't do the surgery in these cases, but this is a young female with a cosmetic deformity and recurrent bleeding from the oral, usually sublabral bleeding. And we advised for the interventional radiologist. They did the sclerotherapy also, but it's failed. So the child, young female presented again with the recurrent bleeding. So we planned for the surgery. So before operating the AV malformation, remember these are highly vascular lesions. So embolization helps a lot. So in this case, we embolized preoperatively. That is successfully more than 90% reduction of blood flow, and we went through the sublabral approach, and now it's going. That female is doing very good. So I don't have the operative pictures of this child, this female. Next common benign pathology is the schwannomas. This is the most common neural tumors we encounter in the neck. Again, I'm going to discuss about cervical sympathetic chain schwannoma. Again, it's preoperatively making a diagnosis of cervical sympathetic chain schwannoma is very, very difficult. It's a post-operative diagnosis because radiologically it's very difficult to differentiate the schwannoma of sympathetic chain from the vagal schwannoma. So what is the most important thing you remember in this case? It's a relation of major vessels to the lesion. Here we can see that there is a splaying of the major carotid vessel. So if you negotiate this, if you want to negotiate a tumor, you have to negotiate the major vessels. So the strategy to manage the neck vessels are very, very important when you deal with the schwannomas. I'll tell you the reason why. So when we plan for the surgery and neck incision made, when you elevate the neck skin flaps, always try lateral to the neck superficial vessels like EJV and the greater auricular nerves, and this is the superficial cervical facial play. These are the some important landmarks that guide you give the guide to the superficial planes. And once the sternocleidomastoid was identified, then we enter into the level 2. See the important neurovascular relationship to the tumor. This is the hypoglossal nerve, this is the spinal accessory nerve, and this is the ansa cervicalis, this is the splayed out ICA, and this is a IJV. So these are the structures we have to negotiate before removing these kind of tumors. And after the clearance, we can see that superior laryngeal nerve that exists also. So with this vessel relationship, very difficult to remove the tumor. So what we did, we removed we ligated the ECA and retracted the ICA. So now we got the very good exposure. Again, this is a point we come to know that what is a possible site of origin. Here we can see clearly the hypoglossal, we can see the superior laryngeal nerve, and I retracted the ICA, and I saw that vagus nerve was free from the tumor. So I came to know, I came to the conclusion that it's possibly from the cervical origin, cervical branches, or from the sympathetic chain, and dissected medially towards the prevertebral fascia. And clearly I saw that medial to the prevertebral fascia, the sympathetic chain is arising from the sympathetic chain. Then it's very easy to, once you know that it's arising from the sympathetic chain, then dissect that and retract the nerve and deliver the tumor. This is a 2 minutes, only 2 minutes job. So what is important? Once you deliver the tumor, again, you maintain the integrity of superior laryngeal nerve, hypoglossal nerve, check the vagus nerve. Okay, we check in this case, we check the vagus nerve, and post-operatively, this patient had a normal vagal nerve function. And again, the classical post-operative sign what you encounter in this cases, this is a example case of right side sympathetic chain schwannoma, that is Horner syndrome. One is a meiosis and the ptosis. This is a classical sign of sympathetic chain schwannoma. And then again, vagal schwannoma, how we differ from the sympathetic chain schwannoma surgically. Again, radiologically they are very difficult to differentiate, but there are certain things you have to remember when you deal with the vagal schwannoma. So in cases of sympathetic chain schwannoma, we never bothered about the nerve. We simply go and cut the nerve. But in case of vagal nerve schwannoma, never do like that. So we know that, we come to know that it's the schwannoma is arising from the vagus nerve. And then we always try to dissect that this schwannoma subscapsular dissection and always try to preserve the vagus nerve normally. So you can see that this is a vagus nerve that's played over the tumor, and I dissected the subcapsular dissection. And this is a splayed vagus nerve that is anatomically maintained. Even though this patient had a vagal paresis, I hope this patient won't go for a muscle laryngeal atrophy. Again, this is not the case always. Sometimes the huge vagal schwannomas, we can't preserve the nerve. This is one case we got a 8 centimeter tumor. In this case, we didn't preserve the vagus nerve. We sacrificed the nerve. But in these kind of cases, I will go for a vagal re-anastomosis with the greater auricular nerve. Again, the role of anastomosis is not to recover the function of vagus nerve. It's just to prevent the atrophy of the laryngeal apparatus. That's it. And again, there is a controversy because some say that a paradoxical movement will come. So no, it's not. I never seen that. I have not done much. Only few cases I have done. But I believe that in that it's prevent the muscular atrophy. So I will always go for a nerval reanimation along with the cricothyroid approximation. This is my strategy when I deal with this vagal nerve. Another most common vascular pathology what we deal in the neck is the paraganglioma. This is a case example of classical multiple paraganglioma that we encountered with the glomus and the carotid tumor. Again, the only few things I want to say, I'm not going to detail about the carotid body tumor. The clue and success depends on the catching up the subadventitial plate. So we all know that carotid body tumor arising from the carotid body, that is near the bifurcations. So even though there are concepts from the inferior to superior dissection and superior to inferior dissection, I prefer and we prefer usually the dissections, we start from the superior and towards the inferior aspect, because it's very easy to get the plane superiorly. So in this case, we can see that I dissected superiorly, I captured the subadventitious plane, and then both the side, and then we get into the carotid body side, and we dissected successfully from the carotid body. Again, I'm not going to discuss about how we removed the paraganglioma, that is totally different. And come to another paraganglioma, that is vagal paraganglioma. Again, the management of vagal paraganglioma is very a huge topic. But why I chosen surgery in this case was, this is a case of a young male presented with the dysphagia and breathing difficulty. You can see that the lesion completely filling the oropharynx. So I can't give the RT because it won't relieve the pressure symptoms. And another problem here was the lesion was 180 degree engulfing the ICA. You can see clearly the 180 degree engagement. That is very challenging. And again, when I deal with these kind of vascular lesions, I never do alone. I always engage my neurosurgery colleagues, always. And remember another thing, when you deal with these vascular lesions, your exposure is adequate, because anytime you can encounter the problem, bleeding. In this case, we embolized, and then 60% only we got the successful through the embolization, because the 30% of the blood supply is from the vertebral artery. That's why, I'm sorry. That's why you can see that my exposure was little more posterior, that is suboccipital triangle. I elevated the sternocleidomastoid as well as the splenius capitis to expose the vertebral artery. I didn't skeletonize, but I exposed the area because I anticipate the vertebral artery bleeder. Again, so you can see that this is the 12th nerve and this is the 11th nerve. We all know that when you deal with this kind of big lesions, we're never going to preserve the function of this cranial nerve, but always try to preserve anatomically. That's why this case took us 8 hours dissection, and we dissected completely the ICA. You can see that the parapharyngeal ICA and till the skull base. You can see the ligated IJV and the skull base entry of the ICA. This is anatomically preserved 12th nerve, anatomically preserved 11th nerve. Even though this patient are all lower cranial nerve palsy postoperatively, because of the young age, he was tolerated very well. After 6 months, he was 3 months decannulated. After 6 months, he was successfully taking orally with minimal aspiration, and but now he is doing very good. I did the second stage cricothyroid approximation, and totally he is fine now. And so one thing I want to mention here is the carotid precautions. Remember, when you deal with the carotid body tumor or vagal paraganglioma or any lesions that is related to the ICA, make sure that you adequate amount of blood availability and appropriate surgical instrument, and inform your surgical vascular surgeons prior to the surgery. In our case, I always engage my neurosurgery colleagues in this kind of cases. And come to some common surgical entities, like this is a pleomorphic adenoma that arising from the tip of the parotid tile. So when I want to discussing this case is when I deal with the tile of parotid lesions, I always prefer modified facelift incision instead of modified player incision. These are more cosmetically appealing because most of the time we deal with the young females, so I prefer this incision. So this is a modified Blair incision, and I always prefer the acute angle for the better approximation. And when you elevate the skin flap, remember always the smash concept, when the superficial musculoaponeurotic system, and never enter into the deep cervical fascia that covers the parotid, because if you enter into this, then there is a high chance of getting into the Praise syndrome. So that's never disturb the smash layer, and always preserve the auricular nerve. That is very, very important when you deal with the benign lesions. So this is the cup of tissue along with the greater auricular nerve I preserved. Once I done the screen elevation, the next step is the identification of tragal pointer. Then this is the preservation of greater auricular nerve. Then I elevate the anterior part of sternocleidomastoid, and to find the posterior digastric. So there are two important landmarks, I believe, that is the anterior part of posterior digastric and the tragal pointer. Once these two landmarks are identified, and then dissect this cup of tissue gradually, very slowly, because this is the site we are going to get the facial nerve. And layer by layer dissection, once you get dissected, you can see the stepwise dissection of this cup of tissue between the digastric and the tragal pointer. So another most important landmark that helps in the identification of is the stylomastoid artery that runs almost always lateral to the facial nerve. Once I cauterized, double ensure that it's not a facial nerve before cauterize. Okay, then you get the facial nerve. Right. Once I identify the main trunk, it's not necessary to dissect all the branches. Based on the lesion, you have to dissect the further branches. So how to dissect? You always you use this Adson forceps and dissect the tissue and lift the tissue and cut. We cut with a 12 number of blade. I never use the cartridge to cut this, or you can use the harmonic scalpel. In this case, I dissected the lower branches. You can see clearly here. I didn't dissect the upper division. I dissected only because my lesion is the tail of the parotid. So I dissected only the lower end of the lower division. And you can see the buccal nerve and marginal mandibular nerve and the cervical branch clearly. So this is the final closure of the parotid. Again, it's not that always you'll get the simple cases. Sometimes you have to get this difficult case like this. This is a case of deep lobe pleomorphic adenoma. And with these kind of cases, we can expect that facial nerve is lateralized or maybe medialized. We don't know that. So in these cases, I usually prefer to use the nerve monitor. As we anticipated, you can see that the facial nerve was displaced laterally. And then after the careful dissection, we can see that the whole nerve, mainly luckily only the inferior trunk, was displaced and splayed over the lesions. That was carefully dissected out, and the tumor was delivered. Once after the tumor delivered, you can see that this is a retromandibular vein, and you can see the buccal branch and the cervical branch, and you can see the integrity of the nerve, and you can see the potentials that in the nerve monitor. Again, this is another complicated case. We usually use the facial nerve monitor, that is recurrent pleomorphic adenoma. So you can see that how challenging it is. It's a recurrent case, and it's too big that in going into the infratemporal fossa and completely replacing the parotid tissue. This is highly challenging. I attended a few days back this case, and I never do the facial nerve trunk identification in these cases, revision case. I always go for a retrograde dissection. So retrograde dissection, we easily, most of the time, very easy to find the buccal branch, and you can see the clear identification of the buccal stimulation. And then with the help of nerve monitor, we trace the zygomatic and the frontal branches, and it helps to trace the facial upper trunk. You can see the upper trunk clearly, and it totally displaced by the tumor. You can see how superior it was, the trunk. And this is a lower division, where the see at most zygomatic level, we are seeing the lower division. Of course, we sacrifice the lower division, but we preserve anatomically the upper division of the facial nerve. So this is very important when to use the facial nerve monitor. It's not necessary to use in every cases. You have to individualize and select the cases and use properly. Another challenging case in the parotid is the sarcomas, especially in the children. Again, these kind of cases, again, we need a multidisciplinary team approach. It's very important. In this case, primarily, first managed by the pediatric surgery team. Pediatric surgery, they will give the chemotherapy with the help of a radiotherapy department. So this child received 6 cycles of chemotherapy. Usually we use the vincristine, actinomycin D, and the cyclophosphamide. After 6 cycles, there is a dramatic reduction in the size, but there is not complete resolution. So you can see the lesion environment of the skin also. So we plan for the excision here. And during excision, we find that the tumor was infiltrating into the buccal branch, but not involving luckily it's not involving the marginal and the upper division. So I sacrificed the buccal along with the masseter and the skin. And the skin advancement cervical flap was advanced. And then after 3 years, suction, he had a very good recovery. So come to the another last session, another common differential diagnosis in the neck, that is neck secondaries. I'm not going to do it in detail about the neck secondaries, and just discuss about a few tips of neck dissection. So before proceeding into the neck dissection, how to choose the incision of the neck dissection, how to decide is based on the few points. You always remember what type of neck dissection you are going to do, and what is the tumor exposure, and carotid artery coverage, previous scar, and the cosmetic aspect of the lesions, and then vascularity of the flaps, and always try to avoid the trifurcation of the incisions. So what are the incisions we have? So for the selected neck dissection, the most common incision what we'll use the apron or the boomerang incision. For radical neck dissection, we always prefer the boomerang or the lateral utility. In post-RT, we use the McVie incisions. So what are the tips for elevating the skin flap? As I told initially, always catch up the subnatisimal plane, and always preserve the EJV as well as the cervical branches like a greater auricular nerve and the EJV. This is very, very important. These are the better guide for the flap elevation. And once you've done the neck flap elevation, and search for the cervical branches and the marginal mandibular always before proceeding further dissection. So in this case, we can see that marginal mandibular and the cervical branches of the facial nerve very clearly. So this then how to preserve the marginal mandibular now? Again, it's very important to preserve the marginal mandibular now. There are 3 points we have to remember. One is when making incision, you always the level of incision is at the level of greater horn of eye. Second thing, intraoperatively, we can use most commonly we use the Hayes-Martin maneuver. That is just a ligation of facial vessel and retract. Or I usually prefer the incision over the inferior part of the submental gland and dissect the deep cervical fascia over the gland and retract the nerves along with the fascia. This is the usually method I prefer. And then it's not always possible because I am the neurologist. I usually deal with the ciliate temporal bone and the parotid malignancy. Sometimes we need to sacrifice the facial nerve. You can see that these are where we cut the marginal mandibular in this case. So how to negotiate the level 1? When you dissect the level 1, the tip is always deal near the anterior border of the digastric muscle, and very easy to get the mylohyoid superiorly. So once you find the digastric and use the bipolar and get the mylohyoid superiorly, and then very easy to dissect the rest of the lymphatic components very easily. So first dissect the muscle and find the anterior border and the entry, just enter below the symphysis and then find the mylohyoid and get the plate. You can get the very good dissection here. Once so then the 1A, then go to the 1B. So you have to follow, once completed the 1A, you have to follow the lower border of the mandible. Once you follow the lower border of the mandible, you can easily dissect the lymphatic component. And then here, when you dissect the tissues over the mylohyoid, remember it's a highly vascular, lot of venous channels will be there. It's preferred never do the blunt dissection. You always use the bipolar or monopolar. And you can see this is the neurovascular structures that lies lateral to the mylohyoid. And then you can see the posterior edge of the mylohyoid. Okay, then once you've done this step, then go posteriorly and catch the facial artery. That's the clue for the facial artery is the lower 1/3 and the posterior superior 2/3 of the junction of the digastric muscle. You will get the usually the exit point of the facial artery. Once you cut and ligate, then again go anteriorly, retract the mylohyoid. Once you retract, you can see that this is the lingual nerve and this is the hypoglossal nerve. Always keep an eye on these structures before ligating the duct of the submandibular gland. So again, level 2A, the clue here is just follow the deep cervical fascia over the cervical or sternocleidomastoid mastoid, and then the boundaries, spinal accessory nerve, digastric, and then remove the just follow the deep cervical fascia and remove the entire lymphatic components. And for the level 3 and level 4, we just go hug the posterior part of sternocleidomastoid mastoid and find the sharp dissection and find the sensory branches of the cervical flexus. Medially, we get the strap muscles of the middle boundary, and we can easily clear the level 3, level 4. One important thing, when you remember, when you deal with the left side, particularly left side, this is left side level 4 dissection. So this is a case of left side. You can see the level 2 dissection, level 3 dissection. When you go, before going into the level 4, remember the chance of injury into the thoracic duct. So how to prevent the injury to the thoracic duct? The most important landmark I use is the transverse cervical artery. This transverse cervical artery is always lies medial to the posterior to the thyrocervical thoracic duct. So this is a better guide I always follow and preserve. And you can see that this is cervical transverse cervical artery, IJV, and then this is the thoracic duct. And you can see the pulsation of transverse cervical artery, and this is the IJV, and this is the thoracic duct. And this is the field what we get when you selective neck dissection with the preservation of facial nerve, and this is the selective neck dissection along with the sacrifice of facial marginal mandibular nerve. So this is a case of sarcoid temporal bone with neck secondary that infiltrating into the IJV. We can see the lesion infiltrating into the IJV. So we proceeded with the radical neck dissection. So in radical neck dissection, what are the few points we have to remember? Before ligating into the upper end of the IJV, you have to identify the spinal accessory nerve, you have to identify the carotid and the vagus nerve. For example, in this case, you can see that this is the IJV and this is the vagus nerve, and you can see the carotid was pushed laterally. This is the hypoglossal nerve. And doubly ensure that before ligating the IJV, the vagus was not entrapped in the suture. And we sacrifice the spinal accessory because it is infiltrated by the tumor. Again, same concept. Before ligating into the lower end, you have to visualize the vagus and the ICA, and then ligate the lower end of the IJV. So we always prefer triple ligation, one in the upper, 2 suture in the lower end. So the method of dissection, it's individual preference, whether inferior to superior or superior to inferior. I prefer inferior to superior dissection. And you can see the preserved vagus nerve and the carotid, and then you can completely dissect out the level 5, level 2, all level nodes. You can, at the end of this dissection, you can see the transverse cervical, and then the scalenus, brachial flexus, and then vagus nerve, carotid, hypoglossal. You can see the clear. This is the field of at the end of the R&D surgery. This is the last case, a case of submandibular gland carcinoma, expleomorphic adenoma. Yeah, because why I'm discussing this case? Radiologically, it seems very easy and very superficial lesions, but this patient had received the radiotherapy, and the challenge was a lot of inflammation. There is no response from the radiotherapy, so they refer to us. So we can see the extensive lesion that involving to the floor of mouth and the parapharyngeal space and lateral to the carotid sheath, and it's a lot of inflammation because of the RT. And in this case, even though it's away from the major vessels, it bleeds like anything. And we transfused 2 units of blood, and took us 5 hours dissection this case because of the superficial that bleeding, lot of inflammations. So very difficult to negotiate this carotid sheath in this case. And after the huge difficulty, we somehow get out of this lesion, and you can see in the field how the inflamed the hypoglossal nerve. We can see the cause of the hypoglossal nerve. Luckily, he didn't have the hypoglossal palsy. The hypoglossal was normal, and then he totally removed the lesions, and he was post-operatively doing very good. So any procedure, no, without complications is unavoidable. Even though how much you are experienced, definitely you get the experience. So you definitely get some complications. So always aware of complications. That's nothing to worry about that. But you anticipate and prepare for everything. So what are the common wound complications we will get? One is the infections, flap necrosis, either seromas, salivary fistula and parotid tumors, scar, and the lymphedema sometimes. So these are some cases I had. This is a mucoepidermal carcinoma. So we sacrificed some skin, but that we made a small posterior incision. So we got a flap necrosis. These are some ugly scars we had. And then another complications what we may encounter is the carotid injuries, IJV injuries, or hematoma. This is one case we had a hematoma. The suture from the facial vein was slipped. So we had this hematoma. And then chylus fistula, especially left side neck dissection. And then neural complications. Either it may be a motor or maybe a sensory nerve. So motor may anticipate a facial nerve palsy, either a simple marginal or it may be a complete facial nerve palsy. 11th nerve, 12th nerve, or sometimes very rarely phrenic nerve also can be injured. The sensory branches, either maybe lingual branches, greater auricular nerve, cervical sympathetic chain, or cervical sensory nerves can be injured. So just remember these are the possible complications we can encounter. So what are the strategies? So just remember, so when you deal with any neck lesions, so we need a thorough clinical examinations and proper workup to get the differential diagnosis and individualize your treatment for the better outcome. And early recognition and the prompt treatment of the preoperative complications very, very important for the better clinical outcome. So again, I was very grateful to my entire team. They are very supportive to me, and of course, my guru always encourages, Dr. Raman from PGI. He always encourages me. And thanks once again, Dr. Prahlad sir, for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Dr. Ravishankar, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And it started off from embryology through history, investigations, and wonderful case scenarios. I loved your operative photographs. Very beautiful, and you have a very good collection of cases, no doubt. It was interesting to see. Now there was I have not seen many people write on the chat but one comment was there that this is from Dr. Srivastava, that when you're doing a ranular excision, sublingual gland also should be excised.
Yes,
correct.
It's always it's come with the lesion alone, always.
Yeah. So are there any other doubts? Maybe you can write in the chat. So I was just wondering, now AV malformation, you have said that it is very difficult to do and better, they're not at. What about hemangiomas of the neck? Do you do, or do you give propranolol, or what is your?
Actually, I have few cases. I forgot to put that. So usually we manage with conservative therapy like a propranolol. We have wonderful response with the propranolol. And very few cases, for example, because of your skull-based surgeons, we had a few child with extensive infratemporal fossa as well as a cheek swelling, extensive, and it's purely mobile. So he is not at all responding with the propranolol.
Yes.
So in that case, is a huge cosmetic concern also there. So we have planned for the surgery in the case, and we have operated few hemangiomas, especially the temporal bone hemangiomas. So the initially
temporal bone hemangiomas, yes.
We have few cases. So they are initially they're responding very good. After some times, somehow they recur with the repeated swelling. Again, they present with the ear polyp. So 2 cases we had, and both the cases we operated. Very good outcome.
So do you embolize these lesions?
No. Hemangioma again.
There's no point in embolizing.
No. So we actually, one case we are planning to embolize. About
Okay.
around 6-7 cases that cases are small cases, and temporal bone, I don't think so. Really, it will help. So I didn't do the embolization. Otherwise, again, it's based on the site of the lesion where you are dealing. Suppose we are dealing a hemangioma in the infratemporal fossa and in the cheek, and it's extensive vascularization you are anticipating, then definitely it will help them. So you have to individualize your case scenarios.
Okay. Now, since I'm not seeing any chats, there's another thing that I wanted to ask you. You said for that matter, any other schwannoma, you will preserve the nerve fibers. That is a little bit difficult to, I think.
Yes.
Because it is played out over it. It arises from the myelin sheath.
That's what I mentioned. It's very difficult to preserve the nerve. But I always attempt to preserve in case of varus, not in every case. We encounter hypoglossal schwannomas, sympathetic schwannomas, and cervical plexus schwannomas, brachial. There are two case scenarios. One is vagus, another is the brachial plexus. I always try to preserve the nerve, always. But sometimes it's not possible. If you are dealing with small lesions, it's successful sometimes. But in bigger lesions, we had a case of 8 centimeter vagal schwannoma. I tried, but I didn't successful, so I sacrificed the nerve. Then I proceeded with the anastomosis.
So you and do anastomosis of the vagus nerve, not independently, not of the recurrent to ANSA or something like that.
No. Because so most of the time I had only 3 cases I had. Both are high vagal schwannomas.
Okay.
High vagal schwannomas. So I don't so it's good. You can search the recurrent vaginal and anastomosis because the caliber is small. You get them more successful. But both the cases I did main trunk
or main branch.
Main.
Yeah, so for innervation of the the intrinsic muscles of the larynx.
Yes. To just prevent that.
The schwanno surgery group, they recommend innervation. Answer to recurrent laryngeal nerve. Because vagus is very difficult to to wake up after
it's a huge controversial topic, but thyroid surgeons, because we have an endosurgery team with us, so they prefer in malignancy always they go for anastomosis. Recurrent laryngeal nerve, when they sacrifice, they always use the ANSA cervicalis for the anastomosis.
But having said that, if you do a very good medialization thyroplasty, I think that takes care of it.
That's why I mentioned I always do the cricothyroid approximation in these cases. Always. I do the cricothyroid approximation along with reinnervation. Reinnervation just to prevent the atrophy of.
It only increases the tone of the muscle. It doesn't it doesn't come back. That's right. I'm aware of that. And I think probably in your neck dissection, you mentioned all the levels. One of the most difficult areas to dissect, especially when you're junior, is your level 2B.
Level 2B. Oh, so
I think you just sort of.
I didn't cover that because.
You didn't cover it. But the importance is that, especially when you're dealing with base of tongue or tonsillar malignancy and and even tongue for that matter. When it recurs in level 2B, and usually it is inoperable.
Yes.
So level 2B, it is a little difficult for people how to learn to dissect in that area. That is a little difficult area, but it is very important as far as.
Yes, ma'am. So only one thing I want to mention, because you mentioned this. So when you deal with a level 2B, make sure that you are not giving undue stretch on the 11th nerve. And never cauterize along the 11th nerve. So because it's a studies proven that if you even anatomically preserve, if you use the undue pressure on the 11th nerve and you cauterize over the 11th nerve, the functionally they are no difference in the functionality. Whether the sacrifice or the stretching, they are functionally functional disabilities are there. So it's very important. Otherwise, so there are some key landmarks like a mastoid tip is there superiorly, and then the digastric, and then you have the very beautiful 11th nerve. Just away from the 11th nerve and hug the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and just stay away from the. You're already away from the major vessels because it lies anteriorly. There is no dangerous structure. Only thing is you have to keep always eye on the 11th nerve. That's it. It's just it's a identification of 11th nerve is the tricky in level 2 dissection, level 2B dissection.
Some doubt, some chats are there. Let me see. Any case, okay. Dr. Chanchal Pal has said it's very nice presentation. And Dr. Akshay has asked, do you reconstruct, did you ever have to reconstruct carotid artery in a carotid body tumor?
No,
Maybe stenting or
no, actually,
maybe stenting or
no. We actually encounter a lot of paragangliomas of
okay.
So till now, we never done a carotid reconstruction, but we are planning to do the anastomosis. My colleagues are routinely they do the carotid body carotid aneurysms. What superficial temporal to the MCA bypass.
Oh, they bypass it.
They
Okay.
routinely bypass. So I have few cases, not done it till yet, but we have few cases for the bypass, and then we are planning for the resection. Maybe next year I will present that. So until date, I have not done any resection anastomosis.
Yeah. I mean, that is not to be contemplated lightly also, resection.
Yeah. It's not that easy.
It's a little, yeah, tricky. No, and I saw that in your dissections, even when it was vagal paraganglioma and vagal sympathetic, cervical sympathetic chain schwannomas, you're going like lateral to medial, or do you go from posterior to anterior? Because see, these lesions, if when they are behind the carotid and the internal jugular vein and carotid vessel, sometimes it's easier to go from behind.
Yes, ma'am. So it's a right point, but one thing is, in my PGI days, I never saw a sympathetic chain schwannomas. Usually, I'll get the vagal schwannomas.
Okay.
So in that case, so sacrificing vagal palsy is not a big deal. But if you are dealing with the sympathetic, what I come across here is around 15 sympathetic chain schwannomas. In that case, if I go blindly more posteriorly without visualizing where is the site of origin, high possibility of injuring the superior laryngeal nerve and the high possibility of vagal. That's my concept. Otherwise, if it's a proven vagal schwannoma, I prefer posterior approach. It's a very easy approach. No need to negotiate any of these vessels, and directly can remove that. So I will teach my residents more of anterior approaches.
Yeah. Okay. There's one question from Dr. Maheen, whether you have witnessed a temporal bone papilloma anytime?
Yeah, we had a inverted papilloma of a temporal bone. One case just now last year.
Okay.
Dr. Amit Kesari operated.
Okay.
I don't
papilloma, how does it look in the temporal bone?
It's suspected as a temporal bone malignancy.
Okay.
It's suspected as a temporal bone malignancy. But surprisingly, the histopathology came to be as a papilloma.
Okay. Are there cases reported in the world?
Yeah.
Many other.
Yeah.
I have
not many, but reported as reports.
Okay. And he has also said
I don't know what papilloma they are asking, whether benign papillomas or
No. I think a temporal bone papilloma case. That's what.
Yeah. So we had cases.
He has seen this in King Fahad, the medical city, Riyadh.
Yeah. We also last year only we had one case.
Yeah. Okay.
I think actually in this case, if you preoperatively know that through the biopsy inverted papilloma, so we won't advise extensive dissection, because in temporal bone malignancy, we'll always go for superficial neck dissection, superficial parotidiectomy, along with the level 2, level 1 dissections based on the nodal status. So these extensive dissections not needed when you anticipate inverted papilloma. Only the local excision is more than enough.
Yeah, it's got an intermediate potential in malignancy. Yeah. I think that sort of concludes the
thank you so
doubt
much.
section. It's a very nice talk, and perhaps you could give some more, maybe because you are in Sanjay Gandhi Institute with a lot of neurotology experience, probably
Sure.
paragangliomas and such.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Prahlad?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ravi Shankar, for this wonderful presentation. Really, I learned a lot personally. Also, Dr. Suja with her expert comments and moderation, wonderful. And Dr. Suja, look forward to have your talk soon. Please give
Yeah,
us
okay.
some topics, please. Okay.
Yes.
Please do contribute for our learning. This thing.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
okay, Prabha. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. Thanks.
yeah, friends, the participants, we are starting two wonderful programs from tomorrow. That is, build, deploy, and operate your own hospital management system software program. This is one unique program we are doing to help our colleagues to learn how to manage their hospital using information technology. And also on August 15th, on Independence Day, we have a one-day program that is 101 must-know PowerPoint skills for doctors. See, I'm proud to say that Ravi Shankar participated in our earlier program, Presence and Present 2020. Today, he made a wonderful presentation.
Yeah,
But
very true.
we couldn't appreciate that because of the Zoom. Otherwise, a lot of animation, special effects were there, but I could make out what's happening there. Okay, yeah,
Okay.
do participate in this program and empower yourself. That's most important. And thank you all. And again, come back to us on Friday evening. Next Friday evening, we'll have another new topic, new speaker, enthralling all of you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prabha.
Yeah.